You're listening to The Pilot's Portfolio, formerly called the Pilot Money Podcast. To learn more about the name change, join us in Season 2.
Every time, man. I mean, tens of flights, the same thing. You're so lucky. Your timing is incredible. Blah, blah, blah. I left, and literally 2 weeks after that, everyone got laid off. All these guys were telling me how great it was. Now the first officers were all on the street for years. It's one thing to read it in the news, but it's one thing to be there and then to see the bottom just fall out.
You're listening to the Pilot Money Podcast, the show dedicated to guiding professional pilots towards a future of financial success and stability. Fly along with your host, Timothy P. Pope, as he provides financial planning insights and answers to your burning questions and dives into real-life stories from fellow pilots who share their successes and cautionary tales. The Pilot Money Podcast takes off now.
Well, folks, welcome back and welcome aboard. This is the Pilot Money Podcast. My name is Timothy P. Pope, certified financial planner specializing in the planning needs of the professional pilot. So sit back and relax. We have a wonderful conversation for you today discussing how to navigate a market downturn financially. Now, this is interesting because whenever I work with clients, I always tell them I treat the future with the deference that it deserves. And what that means is that the short-term market movements is anybody's guess, right? We don't try to time the market or try to be a prognosticator. We'd rather stick with the financial science and focus on the things that we can control. I bring that up because we recorded this interview a few months ago, and now as we prepare to launch it, it seems fairly appropriate. Now, while we don't seem to be facing a recession, things do seem to be slowing down a bit in the aviation industry, at least on the hiring side. And so we'll see what impact that may have as things trickle down. But my hope is that by listening to this, you can take a few key points and apply those to your financial planning without having to experience some of the things that we talk about in today's conversation. So joining me today for this episode is Dylan and Max from the 21.5 Show, the show for professional pilots. So we get to hear about their very first downturns, how they navigated it, and the advice that they would give to pilots today that are in the industry, particularly a lot of the recent entrants in the industry who only knows the record pay packages. So of course, I'll be wrapping it up at the end in the analysis section because both Dylan and Max share several key nuggets that I want to explore further. So let's jump into the conversation. Well, I've been on your show several times, and it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you guys on the Pilot Money Podcast. Dylan and Max from the 21.5 Show, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's fun to be a guest, not the host.
That's right. Just kick back. I love this, Tim. Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. Like I said, this is awesome to have you guys on. So what I'd love to talk to you guys about is it is a fantastic time in aviation industry right now, but you guys know a different side of aviation. So I'd love to hear what has been some of your first experiences with an aviation downturn.
It's pretty much been like this the whole time, actually, Tim. Just live paycheck to paycheck because the money, it's just going to keep rolling in. So we've just been rolling like this for 20 years.
It's been great. It's incredible. I live in a castle right now.
Yeah. In the south of France. Dylan's he bought a vineyard. So no. I guess Dylan and I both, we're similar age and stuff. I think we've both been through like two major aviation downturns. I would say the first one, we were actually not professional pilots yet. We were still training. That was like right after 9/11. But what was interesting about that I learned a lot at that point, then going into my professional careers, I was an intern at American Airlines the summer of 2001. So my internship ended in August of 2001. And as part of that internship, I could ride on the jump seat around the system. And it was almost like a recorded message. Every time I would go to the jump seat, we get up and cruise, and let the captain would turn around and look at me and go, this is the best time to be in aviation we've ever seen. You're so lucky. This is so great because things were moving and it wasn't quite as nuts as it has been recently, but things were rolling like they'd really never done before. Every time, man. I mean, tens of flights, the same thing. This is great. You're so lucky. Your timing is incredible. Blah, blah, blah. I left, and literally 2 weeks after that, everyone got laid off. All these guys were telling me how great it was. Now the first officers were all on the street for years. It's one thing to read it in the news, but it's one thing to be there and then to see the bottom just fall out. And fortunately, my first experience of that happening was not with 3 kids and a mortgage.
Right.
Like, I was a college kid. But I'll tell you what, I've never forgot that, even to this day, to watch how fast things can go from going up to going straight down. I mean, it's a hire till you fire situation a lot of times in the airline business. And, it kind of spreads across all of aviation. So that was kind of my first experience where I was like, oh, things aren't always great and they can change real quick. And so I kept that with me until through my professional career.
I was actually I think, a freshman in college at the time. And the one thing that I learned early on was that in aviation, you know what the butterfly effect is? Like, oh, this butterfly flaps his wings and this other thing happens. And then, and then it spirals into these unknown consequences. And aviation is very sensitive to things happening. Like, yes, 9/11 involved airplanes, and so that was kind of special. But, I think the lesson we learned there is that things can happen in the world that you have absolutely zero control over that can really derail or slow down or increase aviation. And so that was kind of the first thing. I was like, wow, there's a lot of external factors that can affect this career that I have zero control over. And that's one thing that stuck with me kind of throughout this career is that, man, I'm kind of along for a ride in a way. And I think most importantly, it was the lesson that probably the biggest factor in our careers is timing. And it's just something that we can't control.
I think that's a really interesting perspective. So you were not yet a professional pilot, but you were in and around the business. And you became aware that, hey, there's a lot of things outside of my control that can have an outsized impact on my career. And then Max, you lived it as an intern, getting, hey, your timing is great. And then a few months later, you see the bottom fall out. How did that impact you as you continued? What was your next downturn and how did you carry that lesson forward?
Another thing too, just real quick on the internship, I heard this from several pilots. So like, have you ever read the book Hard Landings? And I was like, no. And they're like, this should be required reading if you want to be an airline pilot. I heard that from a couple of guys when I was on the jump seat. So I bought that. That's another kind of way. If you're not able to live it, read that. And that was stuff that happened a long time ago, deregulation, but it just shows that this has not changed for a very long time. The cyclical nature of the airline business, which is aviation as a whole. So that's another good insight into which I read subsequently during that internship and was like, wow, I'm glad that's not happening right now. And then,
glad that's all behind us.
So carrying it into my business aviation career, in my professional pilot career, I always kept that with me. I'm like, God, this can be really great all of a sudden until it's not. And you have to have some sort of preparedness no matter how good things look, because it changes so fast. So I did a couple of things. And one of the things that I did was I maintained, an emergency fund. I had confidence in myself. I'm a pretty resourceful guy. I could figure out how to pay the bills if I need to, but it might take me a couple of months to figure it out if you just all of a sudden are on the street, right? Had the 6-month emergency fund to pay the basic bills. I probably wouldn't support my current lifestyle on that 6-month reserve, but I could get by. That was one thing. And that's hard to do sometimes because you just don't want to. It's more fun to spend money than it is to save it. But again, that experience stayed with me. And then the other thing that I did was I kind of diversified my skill sets. I kind of added as many tools to my toolbox as I could in a couple of different ways. So one of the ways was I flew first for a regional airline. I was commuting to Chicago. I didn't have a lot of free time. You didn't have a lot of days off as it was, plus commuting, it was rough. So I didn't like that though. So I got out of that, went to business aviation, flew for a professional golfer. And I'm like, this is awesome. I wasn't flying very much. I had a lot of time off, so I spent about a month hanging out at the pool. And then I'm a pretty antsy guy. I don't do well relaxing for very long periods of time. So if I am sitting in the pool, I'm like, all right, I got to find something to do. So I ended up, going to real estate school. I got my real estate license and I kind of started a whole nother career.
You did real estate just because you had the time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Literally, I remember the conversation I had with myself. I'm like, I got to do something more productive with all of this time. Like I can't sit around and, hang out at the pool and play video games. This is complete waste.
Right.
So I got a real estate license. I ended up actually starting like a whole nother career of selling real estate as another income stream with that free time that I had. So that was another skill set, another fallback, that I could always do, and I'd still do. And then the other thing, when I was flying, because I could sell real estate, I ended up being able to I kind of shared a job to fly a bigger airplane. So I went from like a smaller plane, a beach jet, to a Gulfstream 3, which then I could fly international and this and that. And there was a retired airline guy that was doing it. It was too much for him. So we shared one job, right? So I'd basically be 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. So my 2 weeks off, I'm like, great, I'll just sell houses and, do my thing. And then the other thing that I did at that time was, it was 135. So I had to go back to training every 6 months to take a PIC check, but that could be in any other jet that was on the certificate. And since I had already left the beach jet, I was alternating recurrence in the Gulfstream and the beach jet. So I was staying dual qualified. And at that time, there was a ton of beach jet contract work in Phoenix area. So on my 2 weeks off, when I wasn't flying the Gulfstream, I would fly the beach jet and sell houses and, and I'd do the whole thing.
I heard a couple of things that you did. There was you diversified your professional skill set. So you got into real estate. And this was early on in your career before your second setback, right? After the internship, you're having this awareness saying, hey, this is an awesome industry, but it's fairly fragile. So you diversified your professional skill set. And then within your aviation career, you still made yourself resourceful by picking up contract gigs in addition to the business aviation. So you diversified your income stream three different ways.
My salary gig was on the Gulfstream was for a home builder. And then 2008 happened.
I'm seeing some concentration here.
Yeah. So I'm like, 2008 happened. And not long after that, I got laid off from my Gulfstream job. I'll never forget. I came home that day after I found out I got laid off. And I was like, honestly, I wasn't that upset. I wasn't that worried about it. I was like, kind of saw that one coming.
I remember that. Yeah.
And I was like, I came home and I remember we were like playing bags on the street with our neighbors or something. I'm like, yeah, I got laid off today. He's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm like, that's good, dude. I'm good. I can still fly the beach jet contract. I can, if there's contract flying on the Gulfstream, I could do that. But that wasn't really viable because there's just so many of the lighter jets around, especially and I'm like, I'm still selling houses. And I'm like, my expenses weren't that big. I'm like, I'll be all right. Thanks, though. And I remember I wasn't that worried about it at the time. And I thought that was kind of weird that I wasn't that worried about it, but I just wasn't that worried because I'm like, I had a lot of other things that I could do. And so,
right,
as silly as it sounds, it wasn't that big of a deal because I had, I think, kind of set myself up in a position where the loss of any one of those three wasn't going to sink the ship.
And with the emergency fund that you had set up, you're not in panic mode at day one, right? Because you've got time to think. You've got time to figure things out. You may change some of your spending habits, but it's not like, the house is on fire straight away.
Yeah. And that's how it was. And ultimately, the way that played out was, and then I ended up getting another full-time salary job on a beach jet because I happened to be current and they happened to have a need. It wasn't the greatest job in the world, but it was a job. And I was able to get another job during that time, which was very fortunate just because I happened to have the right type rating, and the opportunity presented itself and I was qualified to do it. So, subsequently, I've never had to file for unemployment in my life and knock on wood, things have been all right. And I still do that to this day. I'm an airline pilot and I also fly corporate jets and I still have a real estate license and I got a lot of things I can do if more time opens up involuntarily, put it that way.
More time.
Yeah.
On the flip side, I also did some of the diversification of income stuff that Max talked about, real estate. I started writing manuals for Honeywell on the side.
Oh.
There are things there. There are side gigs are not the hard part. It's motivating yourself to do them. But I'll share a little bit different angle of what I did a lot. I think in investing, you probably know this better than I do. A lot of times in a bear market, that's where you actually make your money, right? Because that's when you position yourself so that when things are good, you're ready to go. And the kind of what I focused a lot on was networking. And so I was out of a job more than once in business aviation, but I got pretty involved in the community, in the business aviation groups and organizations, meeting people. And a lot of times when I was without a job, that's when I had more time to do some volunteering and be involved in the community there. And that has really paid off in the long run. So I would encourage folks, as well as diversifying their income, to be able to diversify their relationships in whatever field they're in, to be able to build that network when you got a little bit of spare time, maybe. And the other thing I wanted to mention too was the emergency fund, which I bet for younger listeners is pretty tough to hear. And I don't know how you advise folks, because if they're starting out with student loans and, all these different things, it could be probably pretty daunting to get that built up. And I'll just say, I did not have mine built up, day one. And it's not like you're going to have that thing right away, but it's just the discipline. What we found was just a couple of $100 a month, maybe, if we could, whatever we could afford to get in there. That was one of our highest priorities, because I got laid off right before our wedding. And so my wife and I kind of learned this lesson very quickly on, we've got to be ready to handle a couple of months. And it did not happen overnight. Definitely did not happen overnight, but it's snowballed into something that's valuable.
I think you make a great point, because establishing your emergency fund is just like any other financial goal. You don't come out of the gate typically and just plop it down and say, hey, okay, here's my 6 months, right? You come up with, hey, here's what we can do on a monthly basis. You automate it and you have it go on that account and you build it up over time. Ideally, you'd like to do it during the good times. But I think I really loved your other point, because that's something I did not think about, Dylan, which is, you often hear, hey, your network is your net worth, right? And I think you just talked about how you can make that happen. You can make that work, which is developing your relationships. We always hear it. Aviation is a very small industry. We all know each other, right? And so it makes a lot of sense to develop that network or net worth currency as well, probably during both the good and the bad times, so you can fall back on it, when you need it.
100%.
Another thing too, that is, if you're married, I look at my spouse as another tool in the toolbox too. And whether, depending on the stage of life you're in, if you stay at home mom or not, but even so, to either have some skills and some education, a real estate license, whatever, or if your wife has a job, it's really nice to not have it all to be on you. Okay. And so if your wife has the ability or to build up some skills or whatever, my wife has a good job. She's an employee benefits broker, right? She sells health insurance plans to companies. And so that's really nice to have.
A non-aviation job also.
Yeah. That's exactly. It's very diversified, totally different business. It's just nice to know that income is not tied to aviation that's as volatile. So that's another thing too. I mean, I would always encourage your wife to, even if your spouse, he or she is not currently working, at least have the ability to spool up and to generate income if all hands are on deck. You got to figure it out. So
Max, your first downturn with the internship at American, you said, hey, I wasn't married. I didn't have 3 kids. Your second one, were you married at that point? And was your spouse working?
I was. And my wife was actually pregnant too when I got laid off. So,
okay.
Which happens at the worst time.
I know. It always happens. That's the thing.
Max, we always tell people to read Hard Landing. Maybe we should have your potential spouse read Hard Landing. It would be a better, advice.
Well, that's the thing. She's like, during the good times, you do pretty well. I don't want to work. Well, he's like, let's talk about that after you read this book, because, it's just so many people.
But I think the point that you're illustrating is really well said. Choosing your spouse in aviation is extremely important, because it's not for everybody. There are going to be downturns and there are going to be tough times. And I think that is something that you definitely want to communicate to a potential spouse, because like you're saying, you're going to be gone. Oh, we're going to need help with the kids. It's going to be harder than maybe your friends because I'm going to be gone. There are times I'm going to make a lot of money. There are times I'm not going to make a lot of money. You might have to work. There's a lot of demands on an aviation spouse. And I'm many shows have discussed that in the past, but I think this is another way of illustrating, it's really a family commitment to be a professional pilot. Everybody's got to be in on it.
The other question I have for you guys is, let's say the hands of time have changed. You're magically entering the industry right now as a new entrant, and you're able to command some of these salaries that new FOs, are commanding. Knowing what you know, having gone through the experiences that you did, what are some of your first steps?
I think that it's really hard for those people because this is all they know. And you can tell people till they're blue in the face, it's not always going to be like this and things will go bad. But unless you've seen it, it's really hard to take it seriously, especially when you're, if you're young in your early 20s and you've been broke your whole life and you just started making money, But the advice that I would give is try not to make big financial commitments that are long-term. Don't go buy a house that is right at the edge of your debt to income ratio. If your lender is I don't know, this is going to be close. You should be okay. That's your sign. Because I tell you, every time we see this business skyrocket, and I hope this time is different, things have to slow down at some point. I think we all know that. It's a matter of if it's going to fall off a cliff or not. That's always the question, right? Because we know it goes up and down. It's a matter of how quickly that oscillates and what the amplitude is. So there's some indicators that it is starting to slow down a little, but it's still going pretty fast. And again, with the feds and their monetary policy, if they happen to engineer a rare soft landing here after what they've done to quell inflation, that would be impressive. And I think that would be very helpful to soften the downturn of aviation. But again, if we end up in the throes of a recession, that is historically very bad. And so again, just always be conscious of what's on the backside of the hill here we've climbed. And like you said, Tim, it's when you do well, it's okay to spend money on fun stuff. It's okay, but you just have to make sure that you're being smart with the other side.
Max, tell them your philosophy when you buy a toy, when you buy something fun.
You have to figure out what motivates you. I like to buy toys and fun stuff and expensive adult male toys. But I've always told myself, and this may not be true, but this is what I say. I'm always if you have to finance it, that means you can't afford it because it's a non-essential expense. And so the way that I've obtained those more frivolous spends is I've said, okay, you have to save the money to do it. And if there's a plan, you save every, so much every month, or that would motivate me. I'm well, I could have this if I, worked harder and sold a few more houses on my days off or did whatever. And that's how I've gotten the stuff that is my funny money is by saving for it. And the way I did that was I worked harder to get some of the things that I have. And that was my method of doing it to maintain responsibility and not have long-term financial obligation. Because at the end of the day, those things, you could sell them. It's money, it's depreciating. I've accounted for that. But they have value. You could sell them if you had to, if you needed cash.
Yeah. So I heard some things. I heard delayed gratification is what you just talked about. Hey, if I have to finance it, I probably shouldn't buy it. I should probably save it for cash for my fun stuff. Love it. And then I also heard if you were magically entering the industry right now, two things you wouldn't do is spend every dollar and then buy at the top of your range. If you're just starting out and you're just building that financial foundation. Dylan, what about you? You're magically entering the industry right now. Cash is plentiful. Everything's getting thrown at you. What do you do?
Everything Max said is 100% right on. I will add the slogan for our show, which we came from our chief flight instructor, Embry Riddle, is flexibility is the key to air power. It's a long-standing phrase, came from the military. Flexibility is the key to a successful pilot career. There's no question. Maintain maximum flexibility, especially when you're starting out, because you just don't know what's going to happen, and you're probably going to have to pivot a couple of times. So to me, flexibility means I'm going to be able to move for a different job if I have to, and I'm going to be able to change course. We talked earlier about a spouse and how important that is. In a pilot career, it's very difficult to understand when you're young. But one of the most important things is living near support when you get your career going, right? And that could mean living by your family, living by your spouse's family. You may not know who your spouse is going to be if you're going to have a spouse, and you may not know where they and their family live right now. Those are kind of things that hard to know what's going to be there. And so you've got to be flexible when you decide. You don't know what airline you're going to work for. You don't know what corporate operation you're going to work for. And so buying a house when you're 22 in a city that doesn't have a lot of aviation stuff going on might not be the right choice. Even though you might be able to afford it right now and the money's rolling in, Is that city going to be where you're going to be? It could be tough. So I would maintain maximum flexibility until you're established. Okay, you're at a major airline. You've found a spouse. Now you can maybe start to set some longer term goals. But until then, you want to be able to pivot if you need to.
I think this has been a really important conversation because, you guys have shared your experience of downturns in aviation, how you manage those. But then you brought some other things for folks to think about. When you are setting out in your career, Dylan, you just talked about it as flexibility, but you also talked about young families. Typically is not going to be at the height of your career. You might have more debt. You probably don't have the emergency fund on day one. And then you don't have the assets that can provide some of the flexibility that you just talked about. Hey, we can sell this, we can sell that. This is not locked up in retirement accounts, so we can offset it, no problem, to turn that into cash. So I think that's really interesting for folks to think about is, hey, plan now to establish yourself while times are good. So the next downturn, you can navigate it and you can be like Max, playing hacky sack in the cold, the day you get laid off, and it's not a problem. It's, it's no big deal.
The other thing too, I guess that I thought about that, like you said, that day that I got laid off, a big problem if you're the only one in your household with a full-time job is your health insurance benefits, right? That could be a big issue. And especially if you have kids that require ongoing medical care for something or whatever, it can be a huge deal. And Cobra is not cheap. And so one of the big helps when I did get laid off from my full-time job, right, I was then able to sell real estate and I could contract fly, but that did not provide health insurance benefits, right? But fortunately, my wife was working, and that was another thing. It wasn't that big of a deal because that was a life event, and we just went on her insurance the next day, and it was not a big deal. But that's another thing. I think people, it's all money, 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 but you have to consider, too, the insurance benefits for your family. And it's really nice to have a backup set of benefits. Like even in my current situation, my airline job provides outstanding benefits. But if that went away...
Your wife will sell you some.
Yeah, my wife's job. Yeah, no, she has benefits.
I'm just
at her job selling benefits. So yeah, we would just jump on her benefits that aren't quite as good, but definitely would get the job done. So I think that's the other thing too, that's another big benefit. But to your point, Tim, in closing, it's just think about it. Be prepared. Don't bury your head in the sand, which is kind of like all financial planning, right? That it's not fun. I don't enjoy that part of things. What motivates me is being able to buy fun stuff. But there's the other side of that too, that you have to do the not so fun stuff. And that's the way I look at it. It's like you have to check these boxes over here that are the responsible thing, and then look at the picture of what you want to buy and then work harder to get it.
Well, responsibility gives you untold freedom. Absolutely. You have the freedom to do the things that you want to do, if you lead up to it responsibly. This has been great. I'm excited to have you guys on the show, to host you guys. This has been fun.
Last thing in closing, Tim, most importantly, we haven't mentioned it yet. Never take financial advice from a pilot. Remember, you're going to fly with a lot of pilots, and they're going to tell you what to do with their money. Don't do it. Listen to Tim.
If they start showing you a YouTube video, that's where you should get nervous.
This is funny. I was in church the other day, and I saw a sticker, and it was 21.5 show for professional pilots. One of my kids, I think the sticker fell out of their bag. So I'm like, we'll take that with us. But guys, look, I want to tell the listeners, if you are not listening to the 21.5 show, you should be. Max and Dylan, 21.5 show, the show for professional pilots. It is the aviation podcast out there. So you should be listening to the 21.5 show. Where can they find you guys?
21.5podcast.com, or if you search 21.five in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, we hopefully will pop up with the tan logo. And Tim, we always enjoy having you on the show as well. And we're excited to see where the Pilot Money podcast goes.
Thanks for having us, Tim. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. And that brings us to the analysis section. The first thing I want you to think about is the emergency fund. Look, both of the guys talked about the importance of having one. And it gives you time to take care of the basics, and it gives you time to plan your next move. Look, I get it. The emergency fund is probably going to be one of those aspects of your financial plan that is least exciting to work on. probably between the emergency fund and the estate plan, because nobody likes to talk about what's going to happen when they die. And I can imagine, like, nobody is flying, the folks that you fly with, nobody's talking about, hey, look how awesome my emergency fund is. I'm so glad that I have it. But as we discussed here in the episode, in the event of a downturn, the emergency fund will be critically important for you. If you're a dual pilot family, we're looking at an emergency fund that's no less than 6 months of expenses. We want to offset the concentration risk of being in the same industry. If you're a dual income family but different industries, we can be less than 6 months, but no less than 3 months of your basic living expenses covered, okay? Now, if you are a single income family, we want you to be looking at least 6 months worth of expenses covered in your emergency fund. And again, this is going to be your basic living expenses. Now, I know that some of you guys are going to have different risk tolerances. And sometimes this shows up as needing more cash on hand in order to be comfortable. And that's okay, as long as the amount of cash you're keeping on hand is not preventing you from successfully addressing your other planning needs. And so, for example, I wouldn't want you to be keeping a doomsday fund in cash, right? Way, way more than what you might need in an emergency at the expense of not investing anything. Because historically, cash is a very poor vehicle to keep up with inflation. So you're simply just losing purchasing power over time. On the other side of that coin, some of you guys are going to like to run it pretty lean, okay, and not have anything in cash. And what we want to do, we want to look at it appropriately, okay? We want to match your risk tolerance with your financial circumstances risk capacity. And we want to make sure that you're not just one unforeseen event away from saying, oh my goodness, how did I get here? So in those cases, we're probably thinking about beefing up your cash positions. So point number 2 that I want you guys to think about is networking. You know, Dylan brought up a great point, one that I didn't even think about until he brought it up. And yes, I know this is the Pilot Money podcast. We are not career coaching podcast. But as soon as he said networking, it was immediately clear that this piece of advice was a gold nugget that could have an impact on your bottom line. And here's why. The aviation industry is small. And so when you think about navigating a downturn, especially for the folks in business aviation, networking and keeping those positive, authentic relationships alive could really help you out. And so I imagine that networking could be beneficial to most pilots, but there's 3 groups of pilots that come to mind specifically when thinking about how to navigate a market downturn. The first group of pilots is the business aviation pilots. When the economy takes a turn for recession, corporate flight departments usually feel it pretty quickly. And if you've been maintaining your relationships, you might have a better shot at securing a gig than someone else that's simply just a name on a resume. The other group of pilots that I think networking could help navigate a downturn is the airline pilot who is not yet furlough proof. So you know how this industry works. Last here, first to go. Seniority is everything. So while you build your emergency fund and while you build your brokerage accounts to help you weather a downturn, if you're a recent hire at an airline and you're still not furlough proof yet, keep those relationships alive inside your company and outside your company, because who knows when you may need to phone a friend one day. The third group of pilots that come to mind when thinking about navigating a downturn and how networking can help are those pilots that are currently going through transition. Maybe you're coming from the military and going to the airlines, or maybe you're coming from business aviation and going to the airlines. Right now, I wouldn't say that the climate is an economic downturn per se, but from all accounts, hiring is getting more competitive. And again, we're not career coaches, but thinking about practical tips that can impact your bottom line. Certainly one is being able to land the dream job that you're pursuing. So networking can help in this case too. The last tip that I want you guys to think about and take away from this conversation is diversification. Okay. Both Dylan and Max talked a lot about diversification. So diversifying skill sets, diversifying income streams, with side hustles, diversifying industries between spouses. The diversification that I want to talk about is your qualified or your retirement investments versus your non-qualified investments. So when we say qualified investment, it just simply means that it's some usually retirement account that has a tax advantage setup. So tax advantage growth usually. And the cost of that tax advantage growth is a penalty if you take it out before retirement age. Usually it's age 59 and a half. Now your non-qualified investments mean that you don't necessarily have the tax advantage growth, but that comes at the freedom, that you can take out your investment at any time without penalty. So I've spoken to young guys in their 20s at the regionals, and they have excess cash because right now you can make some money at regionals today. And I think this lesson can apply for them and others along their financial journey. So what we talk about is that they're contributing enough to get the match in their 401k, because regionals typically don't have the non-elective contribution that the majors do. So you're contributing enough to get your match, you're maxing out your Roth IRA, and you still have cash to save and invest. And so what we're looking at is putting money into it inside a brokerage account so they can have flexibility in the future to weather a downturn. The thinking behind this is that we fully expect them, when they get to the majors, to have that industry-leading non-elective contributions into the 401k. We fully expect them to have enough cash to max out their 401ks and their willingness, especially since they're exercising that saving and investing muscles now. So the ability to max out their 401k is going to be there. But what we're building now is a cushion to where if they have some early career upsets as they transition from the regionals to the majors, or even at their current employer, they can use the money in their brokerage account to keep things going while they figure out what's next, particularly if it's an extended period of time. So sure, diversify your skills, diversify your income source, but also diversify your investments to make sure that there's a portion of your investments that are available now in case you need them.
Thank you for joining this episode of Pilot's Portfolio. If you found this information helpful, spread the word and share it with a pilot buddy. Or if you have questions and there's something that you would like to hear discussed on the show, send us an email. You can find the address in the show notes. For those of you who are ready to learn how we help professional pilots with their financial planning needs, schedule an appointment. Until next time, keep the shiny side up, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Pilot's Portfolio is hosted by Timothy P. Pope. Timothy P. Pope is principal owner of 360 Aviation Advisors. 360 Aviation Advisors is a registered investment advisory firm regulated by the state of North Carolina in accordance and compliance to the securities laws and regulations. 360 Aviation Advisors does not render or offer to render personalized investment or tax advice through Pilot's Portfolio. The information provided is for informational purposes only and may not be suitable for all investors and does not constitute financial, tax, investment, or legal advice. All investments involve a degree of risk, including the risk of loss.